Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey, g'day everybody. Welcome back to Voice of Gord. Once again, it's been a little while. I got a special treat here in store for you. One of my previous episodes was a re-release of a discussion I had with Mr. Oliver Bateman of the now defunct What's Left podcast, where he had me on to discuss my thoughts about trucking way back in 2020. And this episode is a re-release of the second discussion I had with Oliver, where we were joined by the one and only Steve Viscelli, sociologist and author of The Big Rig, Trucking and the Decline of the American Dream. Myself and the Logistics Lounge boys had a great little chat with Steve here a few months ago, and this one predates that. I believe Oliver, Steve, and I recorded this in 2021 at the height of the madness that some people would rather forget, and some of us are not going to let slide, at least not for those who orchestrated it, but that's another discussion. Anyway, lots going on in the world of trucking right now. A whole lot of fleets are closing, and I saw a statistic that like 8,000 MC numbers, which is to say individual trucking companies, closed so far in 2024. Big contraction in the market. Our friends at the American Trucking Association are still pushing the driver shortage narrative. And friend of the show, Craig Fuller, CEO over at FreightWaves, offered to debate them at his very own party at F3 down there in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Offered to pay $50,000 to a charity of the ATA's choice should they elect to come and debate Craig about the driver shortage narrative, which, as we all know, is hokum. And the ATA, as of this recording, has not responded. Cowards they are. But anyway, the trucking industry continues to be a mess. I continue to be very disaffected about it all. But I got a new essay coming out with my friends at American Compass, I think in the week after the election. I'm recording this intro on Halloween, Thursday, October 31st. As soon as I release this podcast and get it uploaded, I'm going to be working on my Halloween costume to take my children trick-or-treating. You know, all the doom and gloom in the trucking business, life still goes on. I'm out of the seat. I have been since July of 2023, since I got laid off, as many of you know. I haven't made any moves to get back on the road because the industry is still doing what it does, and I'm enjoying being with my family. I'm going to put a post out on Substack here one of these days about what I've been up to work-wise that's not trucking. But I'm going to have some time here in November, and I'm hoping to get more written stuff out to y'all. I've been really behind here. Basically, most of the summer and the fall, I haven't really put out too much stuff. I've been very, very busy. And confession, I've been in a very long down slump of a pretty deep depression, so whenever I've had some free time, I've been fairly immobilized in my own mind. So if any of you out there are feeling down in the dumps or bad, I feel you, man. It's not fun. And, you know, we have these digital intermediaries that have seemed to have taken over our communications with other people and get in the way, and we're distracted by so much nonsense and garbage. I want to encourage all of you to, pick up the phone and call a friend. Just do it randomly. I remember when I was a kid, my dad would just drive around and go visit people. He'd just pile us in the car on Saturday or Sunday if we had no plans. We would go to my aunt's house. We would go to one of his friends' house. We would just drive around and go say hi to people. We don't do that anymore. We're so atomized and stuck within ourselves, and as much as there's good community and stuff out there in the real world, I think a lot of people are missing out on it. So pick up that phone, call your friends, call your family, call your mom, call your grandma. Do what you got to do. Keep things real, keep things human. What else? I got another podcast coming out here. I recorded a show with a great guy named Ryan, who's a LTL driver down in Austin, Texas. Good friend of mine on Twitter. You know, he thinks deeply about things, and he's on board with the sort of pathologies the trucking industry has allowed to subsume itself to, and technology and surveillance and all that garbage. We had a really nice chat. I'm going to release that one next week. And then future guests of the show. So Oliver Bateman, this fellow that ran What's Left, he's still out there. He's still writing. I'm going to be recording a show with Oliver discussing our fathers and fatherhood and many other things. I'm looking forward to that. Oliver's a great guy. And his dad was quite the character, as is mine. Hey, Leonard, if you're out there, good day. Give me a call after you listen to this. Who else? My friend Nigel, logging truck driver in New Zealand. I met when I lived there in 2002 and 3. Looking to record a show with him here this weekend after the All Blacks play on Sunday. That should be fun. We've been trying to button that down for years now, and man, it takes doing podcasts is actually hard. Like, everyone's busy, everyone has jobs, everyone has families. It's hard to do this. There's these professional podcasters out there like Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and my buddy Sean Newman back there in Canada. They've got it buttoned down, but they've managed to make money out of it and make it a full-time job. And I just do this part-time, and I don't charge anybody for it. I don't make any money from this. I have no advertisers. I don't want that. I don't think I've got it in me to be a full-time podcast guy or journalist or whatever. But the people that do, good for you guys. It's hard, and it's hard to make all of that stuff work when you're in my position. So again, pardon the delay. I know this sounds stupid, but I haven't put out many podcasts here recently, but I've got more coming down the pipe. Ryan, Oliver, Nigel, my friend Danielle Chafin, who works for a freight tech company in the world of TMS, is going to come on the show. And I've got a few other guests here lined up for you, and some more various writing projects. All right, that's enough out of me. If you're a person that listens to me because of my coverage of the Coots case, Tony and Chris are, still out in jail in Alberta. They're at the Drumheller Institution now. I haven't heard much out of them out of the last few weeks. Again, I've been very busy. I'm gonna be writing something on my Substack and sharing information on how you can write letters to them. I encourage you to do that. This will be like the third Christmas they've missed away from their families as politically persecuted guests of the Trudeau regime. And I highly encourage you, if you're a thoughtful person that thinks about other people and other human beings in this world and how fucked up it all is, take 20 minutes or half an hour out of your day, write them guys a letter and put it in the mail for them. I'll have an address for that in the show notes if you can do that, and I'll be writing something on Substack about them here very soon. All right, well, hey, happy Halloween, and I hope my American friends survive election season. I'll be releasing this here, and next Tuesday's the big day when we get to choose between globalist, warmongering fucking idiots and Donald Trump. I hope you make the right choice. Give me your email if you think I'm wrong about anything, or if you have a comment, or you have any questions or suggestions. Gordylocks@protonmail.com. Subscribe to my Substack, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. And we'll be seeing you guys again here real soon. Thanks so much for listening. And let's get on to the show here with Oliver Bateman and Steve Viscelli.
And welcome to a very rare What's Left. We are making this one free 100% to everybody across all channels, the iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever you're listening to it. This is actually part 2 of an episode that we did earlier that's also free to listen to about issues in the trucking industry. And on that episode, we had the Canadian-born truck driver, Gord McGill, who is back with us. He outlined the problem, and he also discussed a book called The Big Rig. The Big Rig, which I read in full after the episode, is this excellent piece of field research, trucking history. The man that wrote it is here with us right now, Steve Viscelli, and he actually worked in the course of writing this book, he worked in the trucking industry. He got his CDL, and really glad to have both of you guys here to have connection of, Professor Viscelli, Gord, myself. We're going to really hash this out. And I want to open this one up. Either Steve, you probably want to take this one. But the big issue that we want to discuss is this. I saw it in the Atlantic today. I was looking at a Derek Thompson article where he repeated the whole 60,000 truck driver shortage in the U.S., repeated that line. So tell our listeners, what does that mean exactly? What does that actually mean? What do you mean by shortage? Is there really a shortage? What's really going on with the trucking industry right now?
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. It's so awesome to be on with you and Gord. So this is obviously the question of the day. And for those of us who've been around the industry, either studying it, working in it, we all know that this idea of a shortage is little more than industry lobbying rhetoric, right? It is a little bit more than that. It's also a recruiting tactic, right? So, they get this free advertising from all the media outlets who run with these stories claiming that there's some insane shortage of workers. And yet, you could be making $70,000 or $100,000 a year and no one wants these jobs. So, those of you who are not making what you'd like to make or who are unemployed, come on in, right? So they get that. And then whatever the policy of the day is that they're pushing, they get to use this as the lead argument for it. So right now, of course, they want, ever cheaper labor in the form of, I don't know whether we should call them teenage truck drivers or child truck drivers, right? So they want the child trucking program that's currently part of the infrastructure bill. And so they want to get that up and running and, start getting 18, 19, 20-year-olds in interstate trucks. And so, it is the shortage idea is lobbying rhetoric. And beyond that, and I've actually emailed a couple of the reporters who have run some headlines recently with this, with the word shortage in it, some of whom talked to me and then still ran those articles. So, I shot off some nasty emails saying, did you ever find any evidence or data that suggests that there is a shortage? And in fact, when you look at the American Trucking Association's, study, there is no methodology. There's no data behind this number. It is literally a made up number. Bob Costello, the chief economist, really good at his job. Every year he makes up a slightly, bigger number of shortage, of our shortage of truck drivers. Now, just real quickly, and then I'll stop. This has been studied, this idea of, where these numbers come from. There's a guy named Peter Capelli, does great work. He's at the Wharton School of Business. And, he basically, found out in looking into these, claims of shortages that what they do is, business associations call a selection of their employers and they say, hey, would you hire more people if you could, right? Or they send out some survey that essentially asks the same question. And, the employers basically say, yeah, well, all else equal, if I could get a truck driver for whatever I wanted to pay him, I'd hire 20 more, and they add up those numbers and they say, oh, the employers we just surveyed are, roughly this percentage of the industry. Let's multiply by some number. And we're going to end up saying, oh, we're 80,000 workers short, right? There's no survey out there. There's no government data. There's no scientific method to figure out how many truck drivers are we short. It's just a made up number for political purposes.
So let me ask you, and both of you guys could answer this. people might be listening to this and they might think, well, I hear there's this shortage. I'm going to enter the trucking industry. I have these two routes. I guess I could get a CDL and drive for a company, or I could get a CDL and I could become a like lease to own type of operator of a truck. How are people entering? No, we're going to talk about that. That's a bad move. But how does the person that hears this, like you did it in your book, Steve? I mean, Gord, you've just been in the industry forever. How does a person that hear that just go and quickly become a truck driver and solve the shortage problem? And like, what's the problem with that? Like, how does that feed into it? You know, in addition to like child truckers that we don't have yet, and all of those things.
Well, you want me to kick? I guess I'll kick us off on that one too. So, you know, I mean, the drivers that I've, you know, interviewed, you know, a lot of them inexperienced. They come from all over the place, right? And that's another good piece of research that's out there. I don't know, maybe we can put up. You got a place where we can put some links up?
Oh yeah. There'll be programming notes for folks who are listening to this. There's always a bunch of stuff you can click on underneath. If you send me, Steve, some stuff, I'll throw it under there for them.
Yeah, so there's a new piece out by Ferris and Balthrop. I'll send you the link. And you know, they went through the government data to see where people were coming from, and then where they go to when they leave the industry. And you know, the industry would like to say, "Hey, we're in this like, you know, cage match with like construction and all these other like good paying blue collar jobs for these guys who have lots of labor market opportunities and you know are gonna go where the pay is best." And you know, historically, that was true for parts of the trucking industry. But today, a lot of these new drivers are coming from all over the place, right? And they don't have any experience in transportation most of the time. And so the industry, and this is something I covered in my book, right, has the chance to really kind of get their hooks in them when they first come in the door, right, to really shape how you make sense of that world of trucking. Which, as you both know, has a long history of class struggle and power, and you know things have really changed. But you know, if you're just a new worker coming in, which I had the good fortune when I started, that I had no idea or a very little idea of the history or what I was getting into, and so when I first came in, I got that whole narrative and that like presentation that like a big truckload company would present to somebody who really didn't know what the hell was going on. And of course, I didn't have any way to, see through it. I experienced it just like most new workers do. And so, they can convince you that there's all kinds of opportunities out there. And most of them still in truckload, right? And pull in dry van, or you might move to refrigerated, right? And then you might buy your own truck, et cetera. But I've learned from Gord, right? The maxim, don't drive anything with doors on it. but when you're a new driver, you don't know that, you think, oh, this is, I'll have a good long, career here in truckload. And then maybe I'll be able to buy a truck. And of course they have all kinds of ways to convince you that that's a good idea.
So that ties into something. That ties into something you said in your book, Steve, about the contractor discourse. There's probably a beginning part of that too, which is the recruitment discourse, right? Where they try and sell you on an image of what the job is, and that image is lacking in some of the more granular realities of the job at hand. And, they can't sell that to people who've done it, such as myself. I wouldn't use the term false advertising, but they certainly omit a lot of what actually goes on and the realities of the economics, right? Like they tell you could make 70 or 80 grand a year, but it's always you could. It's never, this is your actual hourly rate. We guarantee you're getting paid for detention time. We guarantee you all this other stuff, right? I mean, maybe some companies do that, but in the big freight market that typically draws the people into the churn, they're not doing that, I don't think.
Because just so our listeners know, the truckload freight business, the idea of putting various things on the backs of these long trailers that go out that are driven, what is the compensation structure for employees in there, or contract people driving them as sort of contractors, or people who are doing it as these kind of lease arrangements? Like, what's the typical compensation that they get? How do they make it? And how is it that their hourly wage can sometimes, if they calculate it out, Steve, like you do in your book, or Gord, like we've discussed, it's a weird one because they don't make an hourly wage, but if you calculate your hourly wage, it can be insanely low. And you almost have to convince yourself that you're actually not working all these hours to justify doing the work.
So truckload drivers, and this is, I think, what a lot of people think about when they think of like, a truck driver. They think of somebody who is over the road, living out of the truck, with that sleeper cab, right? Driving the interstates, lots of miles. They're almost always, when they're new drivers, paid by the mile. And this is a way of, shifting all that inefficiency of the waiting time and the downtime onto them. Not to, before we even start counting the rest of the time they spend on the road just waiting to work or overnight, right? And this, the thing that gets me about this is that, about this pay structure is, back in the day, the idea was, well, the driver's got some skin in the game. We don't know what he's doing, because we can't see him. We can't, call him and see where he is easily. So, if we send him off with a load that's far away, we'll pay him by the mile, make sure, he's got an incentive to drive, more efficiently, longer, whatever. And, now we have satellite linked computers that monitor everything, and we know exactly where people are. And, when they're at least these big companies do, when they're rolling and when they're not, they calculate the dwell time on these customer locations, everything else. So there's really no reason not to pay them for all the time that they work hourly.
On that note about the tracking and the dwell time, and maybe you can help me with this, because I don't haul freight, I haul propane. I haven't really been doing this for a while. One of the selling features of getting people to accept the ELDs, the electronic logging devices, was that companies who'd already implemented them, or who had Qualcomms or had some kind of electronic onboard recording device previous to the mandate, was that they would be able to calculate the dwell time, the sitting waiting to get loading and unloading, loading and unloaded, and be able to say, hey, eventually we will convince shippers and receivers of the fact you guys are sitting here all the time, and we'll have the receipts. We'll have this digital footprint of how long you've been at their dock. And I don't know that that's ever become a thing. And over and above that, one of the things I've noticed in the wider sort of supply chain discourse that ties into, the truck driver shortage narrative is, everyone's talking efficiency, why are containers not getting unloaded and reloaded fast enough, running off ships, or why isn't any of this stuff working? And I would love to know, does anyone know what the numbers are for how long, like, the total percentage of trucks are sitting? Like, you can keep throwing drivers at a problem, but if everybody's sitting all the time and a certain percentage of the United States trucking fleet is just sitting somewhere because DCs and manufacturers and whoever just don't have their shit together and they're taking an enormous amount of time, like, is anybody working on this? Like, we have all this data now because of all these logging devices. Let's, like, figure it out. Like, is anybody doing that?
Yeah. So that's a great question, Gord. So, I mean, I wish, but we know why the ELDs aren't going to be used for this, right? Because the purpose was not, to help drivers and to make it better, right? And honestly, like, this is another one where ATA, I think, just, it was a slam dunk for them, home run. They nailed it. So they were already, the big fleets were already using automatic onboard recorders, they call them. And basically what those were doing was, they kept you within a 14-hour window. Now, the owner operators, folks who weren't using ELDs, they would basically get up, they'd drive to their pickup location, they'd get loaded, and then they would log on duty and start their day. So they could do a couple extra hours on the beginning of their day for the most part. the big companies using onboard recorders, their day was limited to 14 hours because as soon as that truck moved, it would pick it, or as soon as that truck moved more than 5 miles an hour, you could creep for a while around a lot and, get a little bit of work done without it picking up. But anyway, so they basically rubber stamped their system as was already working, which was counting that 14-hour window and all drive time. Now they made it so that you're not at all counting all of the waiting time, right? Because all of that non-driving time is still manually entered by the driver for the most part. And for the big companies, because their average length of haul has been going down, from roughly 1,000 miles when I was driving 15 years ago down under 500 today, it means that the amount of unpaid non-driving work that drivers are doing in a day, right, has gone up relative to the driving time. And so if you're only logging the driving time and you're already sticking to the 14-hour window, for the big companies, it made no difference. They just basically, got them to say, hey, we're electronically logging. Don't worry about hours of service. Now, meanwhile, their drivers are still violating hours of service every day. Their trainers are violating it almost constantly. They rubber stamped that essentially. And got the owner operators and others who were, had a couple extra hours on either side, it hurt them pretty badly. But it raises, that question of efficiency. And you're totally right, Gord. You can keep throwing drivers at this problem, but people are asking me constantly, what's the silver bullet for, solving the truck driver shortage, right? We'll let the word slip in here a little bit. But let's say the capacity shortage in trucking, it's used their time more efficiently. So if you look at Long Beach and LA, Long Beach did a survey a couple months ago, looking at what the driving time and pay and lives of their port drivers were. The average port driver was getting in 2 turns a day. Okay, meaning they were in and out of the port. They get 2 containers out per day. They're spending hours waiting in line. I don't know. You go on TikTok, you can see some great videos of the guys, driving out of the port on their way out. It's just miles of trucks, right? Waiting to get in. So they wait hours there. They can wait an hour, 2 hours once they're inside. That doesn't even count the time they have to spend looking around for chassis, right? So if we could get that average driver 3 turns per day by reducing a couple of hours of waiting per trip, right? We could effectively increase truck capacity by 50%, right? Go from 2 to 3. We don't have a driver shortage anymore, right? Because we started to use that time more efficiently. And we've seen this in truckload too. There was just some testimony before Congress, I think yesterday. A guy from MIT did a study, said these truckload drivers are driving on average 6.5 hours a day.
Yeah, I saw that. That's ridiculous. Hey.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. If you just, bump up the utilization of the drivers, we don't have a capacity problem. Now,
so let me ask a question then, Steve. Yeah. Because of that, you mentioned at the beginning for the folks who are listening, like a per mile system is perhaps a good solution to the problem of a workforce where it's like, you guys are cowboys, you figure it out, go out and move the load, that type of thing. But with all of this tracking, combined with us having all of this data about how much they sit, this is one of those interesting situations economically where the people that pay they're being freed from having excess skin in the game. You can continue to throw resources. You could have a 500,000 trucker shortage and line them up all the way behind the other ones that are lined up. And it's just this tremendous inefficiency. I mean, do you think if they had to switch to some kind of hourly pay of these people, things would suddenly get a little more, pressure would start being put potentially on ports or potentially on other avenues to make this a little more efficient? Because this is just tons of dead time. What do you calculate in your book some crazy per hour rates that people are only looking at the gross figure of what they earn. I made $50,000 a year. I made $80,000 a year before the deductions of what I spent. And it looks like a big number. They're focused on the big number, but they're not looking at the breakdowns where I made $2 an hour for that week.
Yeah.
Or $3 an hour.
Not initially anyway. I mean, it can take, new drivers a couple of years to figure out that they're getting screwed. So, but if the problem is that we've built the system around that unpaid labor, right? And so piecework, the whole idea behind it, at least as a management theory, is you pay workers by the piece when they have control over production, right? When they can work faster and produce more, right? That's when it's supposed to be economically rational. As you say, oh, you make 5 extra widgets this hour, you get $1 more per widget, $5 more an hour. But when the worker doesn't have control over the speed at which they work, right? Then paying them by the piece doesn't make any sense. You're just shifting all the inefficiencies onto them. But then if you're not paying them and you're not pricing that time, then of course it becomes the thing that you don't count, right? And economists are right there. They'll tell you, if you don't put a price on something, you don't value something, you're not going to use it efficiently. You're just going to treat it as if it's a free resource. So, at those ports or at those loading docks, that driver's time is considered free. So should we switch to hourly? Would that help? Absolutely. Every minute that a driver works, in my opinion, should be counted. We can get into hours of service. I think, I don't think it should be as restrictive as it is on people who are experienced. I think we should have at least 2 tiers. You got less than 6 months experience, you got less than 2 years, whatever it is. You get certain rules. If you've proven yourself to be a safe driver for 2 years or hundreds of thousands of miles, that's the best test there is that you're going to be a safe driver. That's another issue. But here's the thing: truck drivers already should be paid by the hour. 24 hours a day, they're at least entitled to minimum wage. They may be entitled to minimum wage from their home state, right? Or the state that they work in. So in some of these states, a place like Illinois, where I think it's around $11, California, where it's going to be $15. If drivers were paid the minimum wage, the minimum wage would be quite healthy. And the reason for that is that the Department of Labor already requires that truck drivers be paid minimum wage 24 hours a day. Now, the industry has just completely ignored that and said, we only need to pay the minimum wage for the number of hours that they log in their logbooks. And so if we simply gave truck drivers, or enforced the rights that they already have to minimum wage, and then extended the Fair Labor Standards Act to cover them for overtime, we wouldn't have any pay problems or shortage problems in the industry at all.
So let me ask you, but for folks that heard it earlier, you mentioned the American Trucking Association, the trade association. Tell folks a little bit about that. I mean, they're not, like, the name sounds very appealing, but this is not really an organization that represents the trucking man.
They represent very large, as we might call them, mega carriers or legacy carriers, companies with hundreds or thousands of trucks. I take everything they say with a Red Sea boatload of salt. They don't represent me. Can I add something to the previous part about wages and retention? And something I think gets overlooked a lot is, and something I think that Steve touched on a couple of places in his book, is the human element. It's all great to talk about, what state gives you what minimum wage, and do you get paid for your full 24 hours you're away? That's part of it. Everybody wants to get paid, but there's there's a psychological component to being a long distance driver and being on the road all the time. And there's a number of factors at play there. One of them is as that study says, you only spend 6-8 hours a day driving. You're sitting a lot in places waiting. And after a while, that gets in your head like, oh, wow, nobody seems to care whether or not I do anything. And after a while, you start to take that personally. And then, there's the whole ELD thing where, oh, wow, I guess my Fourth Amendment rights went out the window while I'm in this truck. And I have a pretty big bone to pick with some people I refer to as freight nerds who have dismissed that as a cause of people exiting the industry. There's this little thing called principles, and maybe that's quaint nowadays. But there was a lot of older guys that gave it up and said, I'm close enough to retirement now. I'm not driving a truck that the government's spying on me. I'm not, made my own hours and done my own thing for 30 years. Why am I going to keep doing this? And why should people be forced to conform to this? You know, and you might write me off and just say, oh, whatever, you're an anarchist. But it's like, no, you can't maternalize to people. You can't treat them like their time doesn't mean anything. You can't have them say beyond their way home and they're hitting their 60 or 70 hour limit and they're like 3 hours away from home. And now the government says, well, you got to pull the truck over now, without them having the option as a man to say, I'm perfectly energetic enough to carry on with this. Like, you're basically telling people that they're not sovereign over their own body and their own hours, their own health, their own decision-making processes. And you can only do that and still remain like happy about yourself and have some self-esteem behind the wheel for so long, right? Like, maybe some people just view it as a job. I'm incapable of compartmentalizing it as such. But the fact that nobody ever talks about that human element side of it, or the psychology of like just treating people like fucking robots and do as you're told in a particular job, where the whole reason you get into it is to have a certain amount of sovereignty and decision making and independence over your own working life. And the fact that people dismiss that all the time, that's folly. And that's a big reason why a lot of people wash out, don't stick with it, or take early retirement.
Well, let me ask both of you guys, of the increasing logbook requirements, tracking requirements, and time of service requirements, just a ballpark, just a guess or a guesstimate, how much is that even being handled correctly by those people? And how many people think they're doing it correctly? What percentage, just a guesstimate, who think they're doing it correctly are doing it wrong? So, you know, how much compliance is this driving? And if you did comply, wouldn't it, if you really truly complied, wouldn't it take a lot of time to actually manage the logging and whatnot that you had to do?
You want to start, Gord?
Well, I would imagine that, you know, the guys with ELDs are more or less de facto going according to the rules, because if they don't, you know, there's a recording of it, and usually they get pinged by, you know, some human resources or health and safety despot in their office will send them a nastygram on their Qualcomm saying, what are you doing? So, you know, I would say that, you know, sure, it's great for compliance, not so great for anybody that's got a soul.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see with the new, because, you know, the rules have been evolving. So I have seen some, you know, a lot of data on, for some kinds of companies. The driving times, you know, it's hard to get anything significant by it there. You can creep, you know, as drivers call it, where you just stay under 5 miles an hour so it doesn't kick on. But that's only going to get you, you know, maybe into a loading dock or something like that without starting your 14-hour clock. So it's really the loading and unloading time and other, you know, non-driving time that's unrecorded. You know, what does it equal for an over-the-road driver? It's probably still a couple dozen uncounted hours per.
Oh, there's probably even more than that. Like the guys that are hustlers that always get loads moved, they've probably figured out ways to hide their loading and unloading time. Like if they arrive somewhere at night and then they like check in the morning and it takes forever to get them loaded, they're not logging in until they're pulling out, and then they just mask all their loading and unloading time because they know they're only getting paid for the miles. I guarantee you that goes on all the time. Because it's a game theory question. Like if you present people with a problem and that they're going to have to benefit by solving this problem in whatever way they can, they're going to do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's dozens of hours at least. And there's also this personal conveyance rule that, you know, drivers will use all the time. You know, you're not supposed to use it to advance the load. But nobody's going to check on what the hell you're doing. I mean, for the most part, like, you know, if you get into trouble, you know, they're going to go back and look through it. So that's one of the big, you know, issues with it, is that none of it's really used for enforcement or anything like that. It's, you know, it's basically the companies So, I don't really think it's had, again, it's pushed some market share, I think, towards the big companies because it took away one of the advantages that some of the smaller companies and owner operators had. But it really hasn't changed the way the big companies operate.
So let me ask another one here because people are going to ask about it. You mentioned at the beginning, you guys both joked about young truck driver programming as being potentially a plank of new infrastructure spending or new programming or a solution. What do you mean by that, and how would that fit into the existing CDL structure, which already is a very unusual system? Now, Gord talked about it last time, but I think we can revisit it too.
So as it stands, you can get your CDL when you turn 18. Mm-hmm. The problem is, or it's not really a problem. You're not allowed to cross state lines. So you're allowed to drive within your home state. Mm-hmm. You may not cross state lines. And there's a big push to remove that rule. I am of very skeptical mind of this. I mean, I drove when I was 18. I ran around Ontario. I went into Quebec and nearby Michigan kind of illegally before I turned 21. But like the idea is that I stayed close. I wasn't like far away from my home base in Hamilton. And there's been some people who've said that if you're going to allow guys to cross state lines, it should be under the provision of like 150-mile radius, so that people that live right next to a state line for a trucking company and you're 18, you could go 100 miles in one direction and still be in your state and be legal. But if you cross the state line going in the other direction, now that's illegal. And that's sort of impractical. And I get that, but that's not what the big carriers want. Like the ATA and the rest of these guys, they want to take 18-year-olds and throw them off the deep end. And that is bad news. And the crash statistics support all this, right? Like we're talking about safety. Yeah. Well, the number one consideration in truck crashes for safety is inexperience. Mm-hmm. They passed this drug clearinghouse thing, which was another step on the DOT drug screening program in order to get everybody on some list where companies would be able to search it without you having actually done a test. And now they're trying to push this hair follicle testing. So they want to be able to test your hair and not just test your urine. And they're saying, well, safety, safety, safety. Well, none of these guys ever talk about retaining better quality drivers, instituting perhaps a graduated licensing system, maybe doing the 150 air miles thing rather than just giving them carte blanche to go everywhere. Some kind of mentorship. They never talk about that. It's always something else to divert away from the fact that the majority of truck crashes involve people with not very much experience.
So do car crashes in general. I mean, it's you're Gord, you're not one to ever endorse a regulation. I mean, I know you. So the fact that, and Steve knows this too, so the fact that you're saying that it might be good to keep 18 to 21-year-olds close to home is certainly a strong indication that you probably should be these neophyte drivers shouldn't be out there.
No, there's always exceptions to the rule, but there needs to be some kind of apprenticeship program, whether it's informal or baked into the cake like down under. Because I've lived and worked in New Zealand and Australia, and they have a graduated licensing system, so you need to spend 1 year driving like a straight truck before you get to pull anything with a trailer on it. And there's nothing like that here. And that's partly because the licensing system allows for getting your CDL after going to one of these 6-week truck driving schools. So the question, I guess, is what does a legitimate program look like to get younger people behind the wheel, which I would support? I'm not telling anybody they shouldn't go trucking, but the people I worked for were responsible and only let me work locally for the first year or two I drove for them. And they gradually let me go further away. Unfortunately, that's not part of the business model of the big freight carriers. So how do we force them to do that without forcing them? I don't know, but I would think that either a graduated licensing system would go a long way towards that.
Gord, I think you hit it right on the head with the child chucker program. Child chucker program. I'd like it if we could continue to call it that. But
I don't want to infantilize 18-year-olds, but it does seem pretty desperate, you know. And the funny thing is like I was reading an article a little while ago. There's a wider trend of people not getting their car licenses till much later in life now.
Yeah,
so
it's moved up.
If the average person's not even getting their car license until they're 20 or 26 or 30 or whatever, you know, I don't know where they're digging up all these 18-year-old CDL holders, but.
Yeah, you're right. I don't mean any disrespect to those would-be young drivers, but the program itself, I think, is first it's under false pretenses, like you're saying, because what the big carriers. So first of all, the way that they wrote it is that only big carriers are going to be able to engage in this program. So that they wrote it so that you have to have so many hours with a trainer, which is marginally more than most finishing schools do now at big companies. But you have to have forward collision avoidance, and no one else can host these programs except like the biggest carriers. And they can have up to 3,000, the way that it's currently written, up to 3,000 at a time. Back of the envelope calculations, it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks for people to get through this. And right now, the typical new driver will get through in 4 to 6 weeks. Right. So this isn't like an extended program or, additional safety features or anything like that. They've basically taken what they do right now, called it an apprenticeship, right, and then reduced the age at which they're able to use folks. But Gord has hit on it, which is that intrastate driving, that local driving. It doesn't matter if you cross a state border. It matters how far from your home, base you're going, right? Because that's going to determine the kind of work that you're doing. And so what these over-the-road companies do is, they put you out on the road for weeks at a time. You may be working odd hours. You're kind of on, you're off. You may not be sleeping well. You may be driving with a trainer, right? And so you may be trying to get sleep in the back of the truck, which is really hard for some people. And the average person who has not worked this, done this kind of work and managed their own body and fatigue, it's tiring. And they're just not, and this is one of the reasons why blue collar men have traditionally had a leg up, I think, in this industry is a lot of them that come out of construction and other like agriculture, they're used to pacing themselves over this long day and sort of, monitoring their own fatigue and learn how to work those kind of hours. You can't just, if you throw somebody who works a typical 9 to 5, selling shoes, and you put them in a truck and you say, go work 100 hours. And when you're tired, take a nap, they're going to fall asleep at the wheel and drive off the side of the road. You build that up. And so this gets to the bigger point that Gord's making too, that our pipeline here in the U.S. is kind of organized backwards. We take people and we throw them into who are interested in becoming career truck drivers. And the thing is that I've been trying to really hammer home to policymakers is when you see this turnover, these are not people who said like, I'm going to go down the road and get a part-time job, because I need to make some money. These are people who are looking for a career change. They're making a big investment. They may be quitting a job. They're going to take months to get trained. They know they're going to be working at not great wages, at least to start. So they're making a serious move and investment and sacrifice to become a truck driver. And then we throw them in the worst possible jobs, in the hardest jobs, driving the biggest, trucks and in these dangerous kind of rotations that they're not prepared for. And then we wonder why they're leaving in 3 months, 6 months, et cetera. So rather than starting, as Gord was saying, with that local driving, a lot of places you start with dock work. You learn how to load a truck before you learn to drive it. Then you might drive locally, you drive a small truck and you work your way up. And that's what a real apprenticeship looks like. And there's a mentor there, right? Long term, right? And there are people there who are invested in your long-term success. Like that's what an apprenticeship is. What we have is just basically a labor mill, right? And why do we have it? Because it's the cheapest way to move freight and because we're subsidizing the hell out of it. So if you go to you get out of the military you can get money to go get trained at a truck driving school. You go to the unemployment office, you can get a grant to go get retrained as a truck driver. So, these companies aren't paying the full cost of it. And so they're burning through the labor because as far as they're concerned, it's a renewable resource.
Well, let me ask, because they're going to ask on this show, people did ask with regard to the previous episode, to what extent has a group like the Teamsters, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, done anything of like what have they done in this space that has potentially helped their specific band of truck drivers, or what have they tried to contribute, or in their unionizing, what have they accomplished for some of these groups, if any?
Well, historically, I mean, they organized the most powerful labor union in American history, and that benefited, millions and millions of truck drivers over the time that the industry was regulated, including those who were not members. And I'll tell you, some of the most interesting sections of interviews that I do with old timers are the classic owner operators who tell me, damn, I wish the Teamsters were still around and over the road because I made good money then, because they raised the floor, they raised the rates. And so, even the carriers who weren't organized by them and even the independents did better because the Teamsters got, their members higher wages and better jobs. Today, they're critical. They're on Capitol Hill. They're the only lobbying force that opposes ATA, with the exception of OIDA, and who also is a strong advocate as well. But when you're going up against big corporate money on Capitol Hill, it's a constant battle, and you're constantly outgunned. And the Teamsters have some of the the only muscle up there that can hold some of this stuff today.
Speaking of wage floors and the Teamsters keeping it up for everybody else, much like unions in other sectors, there seems to be a whole lot of talk about debasing it further in the media. Our friends at the Cato Institute put something out a couple weeks ago saying we should allow Mexican truck drivers to work for American companies. When I first saw the article, I thought it was about allowing Mexican trucks just to come into the U.S. like Canadian ones can. And no, they were like literally saying we need to import truck drivers from Mexico. There was an article in the Telegraph in the UK because apparently there's a truck driver shortage, air quotes, in the UK. Same thing. Let's bring truck drivers in from Nigeria and South Africa and Poland and wherever else. Articles in Canada. Canada has a long history of integrating immigrant communities into the trucking business there, maybe a bit more successfully than others. I don't know. But the talk of, retention and making pay and conditions is better. It seems to be off the table still. It's like the thing I thought was hilarious is like there's all these articles going around saying, well, we need to bring in truck drivers from other countries. So like, what's the worldwide pool of truck drivers? Like, where are we going to get them all? So if England is stealing them from, Nigeria and South Africa and Poland, and Canada is stealing them all from India and Pakistan, and the United States is stealing them from Central America, what about those other countries? Where are they going to get their replacement drivers from? Because they still need to move stuff around. It's like it's like international musical chairs with 18 wheelers.
I did see somebody post about that. I don't want to say it's Walter Olson. I don't know who it was, but they said the EU had this wonderful system that solved Britain's truck driving woes, which was that it allowed workers from Poland and from Slovenia, from Slovakia, to come and drive the trucks there for less money. And when when Brexit was finally completed, they lost that pool of 100,000 people. And so the guest work, or not even, it wouldn't be even a guest worker program in that case, but a guest worker program to fill the trucking ranks would strengthen the American workforce and, reinvigorate, get some population growth going and all of these other positive benefits. Like that was one suggestion. I have seen people mentioning that like as a solution, because England, I guess, cut some deals to get some kind of like visas or something to get truck drivers into the post-Brexit into the country again or something, some kind of deal to get laborers in there to fill those roles, rather than addressing costs on the front end. I mean, do manufacture or do not manufacturers, but do trucking companies in working with, the groups that they're working with, do they have the leeway to adjust, do something other than bring in workers? Like, do they have the leeway to adjust costs? Or is it as bad as they say, where everything's like razor thin margins? If you move, like everything depends on this system of, $2, essentially a $2 an hour wage or something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's like, they complain that the market is vicious and competitive, and they have to meet the wage, and it's like, it would be like you're in a boxing match and somebody takes off their gloves and puts on brass knuckles and says, "Oh my God, look how much tougher this fight just got." Now I might have to bring out something else next, and they just keep lowering. So what we've seen over time is, it's like the next scheme that you can come up with to give yourself a little bit of an advantage to lower those labor costs, you end up winning, and then the next one goes down, and so now we see these companies, it's rampant in the refrigerated segment, that are convincing people to become independent contractors and to buy their trucks literally right out of truck driving school.
Yes.
You could owe us $8,000 at 24% interest on this training, or we'll let you out of it for $1 if you buy your own truck and become an independent contractor, right? So like that didn't exist 25 years ago, right? So they keep lowering it and then saying, "Oh my God, look how competitive it is. We don't have any choice." And yet every time they have the opportunity to, go to Capitol Hill and say, put a floor under this, like stabilize this so we can, know what the cost of labor is going to be. Instead, they keep driving it down. So they keep, pushing this anything to protect misclassification. They keep opposing any kind of, enforcement around minimum wage. Over and over again, they collectively push to lower the labor standards and then complain, "Oh, there's no floor here. We don't have any choice. We have to pay people less and less." On the number of drivers, I mean, we have something like 10 million current CDL, Class A CDL holders in the United States. Wow. 10 million. We have about 3.7 million jobs that require a CDL at all, and that's A, B, and I think chauffeurs licenses. And we have about 1.9 million heavy truck drivers that require that Class A. We just ran the numbers in California. 145,000 jobs require a Class A CDL. We've got about 480,000 current Class A CDL licenses in California. So we've got 3 times the number. We don't need to import labor. It's right here. It's been trained. And, these folks who want to use, immigrant labor, I would say, you don't even have to go outside the border. Why don't we, if you're that interested, let's create a path to citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers who are second-class citizens in our labor markets right now. And they can go, become truck drivers and have the same right. So I mean, the idea of just importing the cheapest possible, most vulnerable labor you have, right, seems to be the first go-to solution, right?
I mean, I'm friends with some of those like Cato Institute people and Reason Magazine people, and I have seen arguments from them also, Gordon, Steve, to the effect that if an industry did address the labor problem by paying higher wages, all you would do is worsen the inflation problem. And so importing cheaper labor is a solution to the inflation problem because you can keep wages stagnant, and thus it won't be reflected in higher costs.
Well, that's just this like vicious cycle thinking, right? Like, yeah. At what point does it stop, though? And I'm sympathetic to like certain free market arguments, maybe not all of them anymore, but like they keep trying to make it this zero-sum thing rather than if people have, if you pay people more, then they put, like, there's the argument that goes in the opposite direction, right? If you pay people more, they have more money, they spend more money. Like it's like they're trying to play pin the tail on the donkey here with inflation now, because what's the inflation rate now? Like, is it like 8% or something?
7%, I think I've seen 6%, 7%, something like that.
So, these arguments about which way do you go to address that, I mean, they're great in the abstract for like wonks and like,
that's where it's coming from.
Or for like members of the like podcast, as some of y'all are called. Yeah. But like, I'm here in reality land, and I've got 2 kids to feed, and a 23-year-old pickup truck I have to fix, and fuck y'all. I want more money.
Yeah.
You cannot expect people to work for wages that were no good 20 years ago.
Yes. It's a terrible solution. You at least want to be able to buy the things that are increasing in price as a worker.
Yeah, no, and like our mutual friends at Good Old Boys, like, get me a politician that's gonna like pay up. Like, let's set the conditions for us here. Bring us the bacon. All the academic, all the economic arguments, get lost. What is going to improve the material conditions of the people working here?
Well, let me ask then, Steve or Gord, what is on the horizon that could do that? What is on the horizon that could improve? How about automation, Steve? Does automation promise a solution to any of this?
Well, I think, a good friend of mine, Doug Block, who is a Teamster out in California and works on, legislative affairs, government affairs, says basically trucking industry created this massive mess, right, in truckload and in ports, right? And now they're going to solve it through automation, and they're going to, they have this shortage argument to do it. And I do think, look, automation is coming. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think we are at a situation in a place where the longshoremen were in the 1960s.
So when we say automation too, I guess I want to make clear for people listening, what do you think would be the first thing to be automated or automatable within the industry?
Well, so can I add to that too? Like, go. I understand you're working on this new book about the looming automation, Steve. And I was after answering Oliver's question, I'm sort of wondering, like, what are the technical details you've come across that are making it, like, what's preventing the rollout of it onto public highways? I'm sure there's a lot of people wondering about that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of speculation amongst me and my truck driving comrades, and not a whole lot of people that know the exact details. So that'd be handy.
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, I got a bunch of questions about this before any of this came on, so I was like, I'll ask them. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been spending 3-4 years now, like, talking to the engineering teams, riding around in the trucks, trying to figure out, and I don't, I'm handy, but I don't have like computer science knowledge or robotics. So, most of it, I don't understand the technical, side of it at all.
You can park the 18-wheeler and do all that though. So for folks who are listening, you can handle an 18-wheeler, no problem.
Yeah. But, on the computer science and the sensors, et cetera, I don't know, how far away we are. People always ask me that. I have no way to tell. But essentially what these, trucks are doing is there are 3 separate components. One is, sort of localization and perception, as it's called. It sort of figures out, what's in its environment, right? What is its environment? Where is it? On a map, right? So a lot of that's 3-dimensional mapping, right? Where you probably hear about LiDAR. So it's basically creating an image of its environment. It's figuring out what's in it. The next component is then figuring out what are those things likely to do and what should I do in response, right? So that's really the AI part of it, of the decision-making algorithms as you hear it. And then the next part is really just control of an interaction with the truck itself. So accelerometers and gyroscopes to figure out, okay, how is the truck actually moving, and then controlling the various parts of it. So there's tremendous progress being made on that localization and the sensing side to figure out with LiDARs and to map the sort of environment around it. The control side, that third problem, is also pretty straightforward, because cars and trucks today are super sophisticated, and there are lots of systems that are already developed and built in there, like automatic braking, anti-lock braking, lane maintenance, all that stuff. So it's really in that middle problem of figuring out, okay, what are these things that we have sort of mapped out and that we see moving, and what are they likely to do, and what should we do in response? And I think this is a way harder task than people think. So when we say like object recognition, I thought that, they'd go in and say, oh, that's a kid, that's a car, that's a bicycle. Most of the companies are just moving from, oh, there's a mass that's moving in a direction, so that's kind of, which is going to limit what you can do with the prediction of what that thing's likely to do, right? So, if that mass that's moving in a direction is a kid on a bike with a football, a human immediately is going to go, oh shit, there's a kid on a bike with a football, right? That computer can't tell the difference between that and a garbage can that's getting blown by the wind across the road, right? Like, so we're way further away on that than people think. So what they've done is they've simplified the problem, right? So they've said, forget about any place where you're going to see a kid on a bicycle with a football. Like, that's out, that's science fiction. We're going to stay on the interstates where we have controlled, limited access, roads. And the problem is basically stay in your lane and don't hit anything in front of you, and then you can kind of treat those masses with velocity as like, oh, there's a car moving along. So, that's, I would say, will we see trucks driving themselves without a driver in the next couple years? Yeah, I think so, in pilot programs. Will they be profitable? No way. Not in the next few years. But that's building. So I would say, so on the bigger picture of automation, we've already seen huge impacts. So automatic shifting, right? Which, is not a big sexy thing, right? But the fact that you don't have to learn how to shift a truck manually is it's a huge advantage to bringing in cheaper labor. Right now, you can take less skilled folks and you can get them up to speed, especially fuel efficiency wise. I mean, if you see a new driver try to learn to manually shift a truck, it's a disaster. Right? I mean, it's ugly and it's dangerous, but it's also a waste of fuel. So if you can get an automatic transmission, right, it's not like science fiction stuff, right, that everybody wants to talk about, but it makes a huge difference in whether or not you can replace that skilled driver and at what cost. Now, here's the other big one right now. So there are things like mapping, right? The ELD logging, all that stuff that's automation, right? Of these different tasks that truck drivers do. The big one is forward collision avoidance. So as soon as the big cost with inexperienced drivers, I mean, they're certainly less efficient in other ways, but they run over more minivans, as Gord was saying. That's the big cost of new drivers. Once that truck can't hit things at high speed, now the value of a really experienced, conscientious, safe driver goes out the window, right? Why would you pay that guy $80,000 a year when you can get somebody else in there for 40 and you're still not going to run over minivans? So that kind of automation, I think, is going to continue to chip away at the value of experienced drivers.
I have to wonder though, but the next step from that between the front collision avoidance and automated trucks I've seen is having somebody in the truck with the truck's driving, right? So it's, imagine you're in an airplane and the pilot takes it off and then it's sort of on cruise control and, they adjust a couple things, but the computer's flying the plane until it's time to land. And in fact, I think the computer lands it often as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. The problem I see with that is like, sure, they've already dumbed it down with automatic transmissions. There's various gadgets and whatnot in the truck, but like, if you're just sitting there riding in this thing to make sure that the computer doesn't go haywire and not notice that someone stopped in front of you or go off the road or whatever, who are they going to find to do that? Who's just going to sit there and read a book for 600 miles across Wyoming and Nebraska or whatever, and just be the literal steering? There's a joke in trucker circles about steering wheel holders. The guys that like don't take the job seriously, might not know how to shift, maybe don't look after themselves, whatever. They're just there holding the wheel. They're not thinking about it as a profession or a job. And this is literally what we're talking about. In order to get to fully automated luxury space communist trucking or whatever, you have to have these people that are literally just sitting there while the truck does what it's doing as a stopgap. And who's going to want to do that? Someone tell me. Like, I don't, like, who would do this?
Yeah,
I've got a guy. I forgot. The listeners have heard about him before. The Z-Man would do it, but go ahead.
Yeah. So no, I mean, Gord, I think I'm right there with you on this one. I mean, we can post some links, but
absolutely.
Yeah. So I have this report out called Driverless. It's called Driverless ? At driverlessreport.org. Where I lay out basically the 6 scenarios that the developers said they were working on. So the first question, that I would ask them is, what are you going to do with it? What's this thing going to be able to do, that you're trying to build? Like, what, how do you envision it working? And oftentimes they had no idea, what the sort of real world applications were. They just knew that they were going to build a truck that drove themselves. And I've talked about this, in other places, and Gord, I think we've mentioned it. We've talked about it. This is the outcome of a Defense Department, program to build, humanless ground vehicles, right? That's where this came from. 15 years of investment in billions of dollars at top universities and the Defense Department to build driverless vehicles for combat and for fuel convoys, which turned out to be really this predated Iraq and Afghanistan, where they realized the value of aerial drones. Right. And then they were like, oh, my God, we got to have, can we do this on the ground? Then the priority just went through the roof. And so I came up with 6 scenarios out of what people told me they thought these things might be able to do. One of which is the autopilot scenario. That's what I call the one you just laid out, where the person basically is still in the vehicle, but it's driving itself. So they go and, maybe they go off duty. And I think that's the one that I use to illustrate what I think is the important point right now for us on the policy side, which is, this stuff doesn't have an automatic path to it, right? There's no scenario at the end for how this stuff gets used that's baked into the technology itself. It's going to be determined by the economics of it, right? And the economics of it are determined by the policy. So if we, automate after we let, say, cheap immigrant labor from abroad come in, right? So if these are, workers without full rights who are super cheap, who you could have off duty and unpaid while the truck is driving itself, then sure, why wouldn't you leave them in that truck and let it drive itself? That way, you don't have to go to another scenario where, for instance, one of them exit to exit, you have a human driver drive, where that kid might be on the bike with a football. They bring the trailer out to the interstate, and then a self-driving truck, takes that trailer. So you swap the trailer out, right? The self-driving truck takes it on the interstate, no human in there. Right. And then you get to another transfer hub or whatever it is, before that local delivery. Now, if you don't have to pay the driver, if they can log that time as off duty for hours of service, right? And hell, let's classify them as independent contractors and they can own the truck that's driving itself too, right? You're increasing, right, the return you're going to get on that scenario, right? How profitable that scenario is going to be. But if we say truck drivers are entitled to minimum wage 24 hours a day and overtime, right? And if, they're driving a truck that's, tied into a central hub that's directing it. They're an employee, so they're going to get Social Security and Medicare and all that stuff. Then what are companies going to do? Well, they're going to pull the driver out altogether, right? Because it's going to be expensive to keep them in there. So I think that's a big part of it. What I'm trying to, talk to people about now, especially policymakers, is, don't think like, the question is not how many jobs are we going to lose? The question is, what the hell do we want these things to do? And that's not just for trucking companies to decide. That's for, the Department of Transportation and Department of Labor and oh, hell, all the people who live in this country and all the workers in this country, who might say, hey, let's make our roads safer. Let's make truck drivers' jobs better. Let's get our stuff faster and even cheaper. What the hell? Let's make the jobs better, because there are scenarios where we could do that.
Well, people trying to make my job better for me have done nothing of the sort. Mind you, I'm in a bit of an anachronism, but anyway, carry on. I can't wait for the masses to tell me how my job is going to be better for me. Oh yeah.
So let me ask, in light of the current, and I mean, it extends beyond trucking, and I mean, there's aspects, and Gord and I were talking about a logistics episode at one point too. We haven't made that happen, but yet we probably will at some point. But is there going to be in the next 12, 24 months? Do you think, or have you heard from anyone that is there anything in motion beyond these kind of like, let the younger people drive further? Is there anything that can kind of break this impasse that we're at, that this situation is going to force, that might be positive? Is there anything coming down the line that could be, that could get some of this worked out? Like, I mean, your port's going to start getting more efficient can some of this waiting time be pushed out? I mean, that's been we're trying to make ports run longer now, I guess, is one of or more shifts or whatever. That's one of the proposed solutions or things that's been implemented. What will be coming down the pipe that might potentially be beneficial here, if there is anything?
Well, I think we've seen a sustained set of pressures on the industry, some of which you could argue are having some impact. We're 10 years into all kinds of class action lawsuits against the big carriers that have been slowly pushing on the misclassification and independent contractor schemes, on the training programs. And we are seeing, over the last 5 to 6 years, increase in wages in some of these segments. So, whatever we attribute the cause to, we are seeing, some upward pressure on wages for sure for new drivers, and some companies realizing, this model is not working. That's why they need the child trucker program, is to bring those labor costs back down. So there's sustained pressure. California has really been pushing the envelope, and I know people disagree with a lot of it, but AB5 is a potentially transformative law. AB5 would essentially require that anybody who is a trucking company who uses a truck driver, that truck driver is their employee. Now, I think the consequences of it potentially, for owner operators, et cetera, are a bit overblown. Essentially, you'd have to be a real owner operator and have your own motor carrier authority, and insurance to go with it. That's kind of the consequence. You can't work under someone else's motor carrier authority. So that's a huge one, and that may go to the Supreme Court. We're waiting to hear any day as to whether or not that. So the state of California has won several times on this. And as soon as the Supreme Court says, if the Supreme Court says we're not going to hear it, then that law will go into effect. That's going to have just an unbelievable impact at the ports, where all these misclassified drivers who don't get paid for their time are going to be entitled to minimum wage. In fact, they're going to be entitled to time and a half overtime, because they don't leave the state, many of them. So that's happening. And, the Biden administration, from what I can tell, is absolutely laser focused on these issues because of the supply chain crisis. And so it would not surprise me if you see all kinds of additional focus on issues of misclassification and the PRO Act and some of the legislative attempts that they've proposed, but also in enforcement actions and things like that, that could put a new kind of focus on some of the worst abuses here.
So let me ask you then, Steve, with regard to AB5, is the Organization of Owner-Operators opposing that as well as the American Trucking Association? Have they weighed in opposition to it? So usually, so there are both of those organizations against it.
They are. They have. And to be honest, I was a little surprised at first. And I think it's kind of it's a devil you know kind of thing for them potentially. But I think what's really driving it, because most of OOIDA's membership are true owner operators. They're legitimate owner operators who have their own motor carrier authority and are small business truckers. But I think the big complication for them is that a number of those small companies rely on independent contractors. So it is, and in fact, it's really common for, the first way that you go from being a single truck owner to a multi-truck owner is, you got another truck and you hire somebody as an independent contractor to do it. So I think that's the big concern for their membership is not the actual small business truckers, work himself, but the fact that he may have an independent contractor or two working for him.
And and again, I'm trying to use this episode to clarify a lot of just concepts for the listeners and people that might be tuning in that haven't listened before. How would the PRO Act, or the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, how would that benefit truck drivers, these misclassified truck drivers in this case? How would what it's potentially going to do benefit them? Because some people, they hear back and forth, the PRO Act is toothless, it's not going to do anything, or the PRO Act is great, but how would truckers fit into the PRO Act solution that's being proposed?
So if truck drivers were deemed to be employees rather than independent contractors, for a motor carrier, working for a motor carrier, they'd have the right to organize a union. First of all, which at the ports, even though many of the drivers, love the idea of owning their own truck and want to continue to own their own truck, that's not necessarily incompatible with being an employee. And so they'd be able to join a union. They would be, entitled to Medicare and Social Security. And I've had the unfortunate, experience of talking with drivers who are getting toward the end of the career and realize that, I didn't pay into Social Security and neither did what I thought was my employer, and have found themselves in some really uncomfortable positions at the end of their career. So, but more importantly, I think it's going to raise it would raise the floor, right? And so I think you could still have plenty of opportunities for drivers to become legitimate owner operators and even own the truck, which is basically what's called a 2-check solution, which says, yeah, you want to own your own truck? Great. You rent the truck to the motor carrier whose authority you operate under, and you get paid, as an employee. So you get all the benefits, of being an employee, but you also get paid for the fact that you own and maybe even maintain and do a lot of work on your own truck. So for drivers, it would have a whole range of benefits.
And another question that I got before this one, Gord, and you touched on it a little bit last time, but you might want to answer this one too, Gord. People asked me prior to this episode, I'm thinking about going into trucking. You joked about it at the beginning, Steve. What are the best avenues or the most skilled avenues or the areas of trucking that I should explore? People ask that, or what areas are going to be anti-fragile in the trucking industry, or that there's going to be a constant demand for, and will I ever be able to get the skill to do these things? Those are questions that people had within the industry.
That's a good question. As far as anti-fragile, and I'm assuming they're meaning sort of
it's going to be around always.
economically recession proof, automation proof. Niche carriers, I don't think that the government is ever going to let people that do what I do, because I haul hazardous materials, I haul propane. I don't think they're ever going to let hazmats just be fly-by-wire. There's certain portions of the trucking business that require labor. Like, you got to be there. If you're self-loader logging, like a lot of the hardwood guys around here, they all have their own picker on the truck, and I don't foresee that being automated anytime soon. Pulling heavy equipment, doing anything that's customer facing where you have to, UPS, FedEx, dropping off parcels, those jobs I think are going to be around for a while to come yet. As far as getting into it, avoid the debt peonage schemes that Steve outlines so well in the book. I actually had a conversation with a guy a little while ago, a friend of a friend who was looking at getting into trucking, and I've come to find out that the state of Missouri will no longer let you go and book your own CDL test, right? So for most of history, you've been able to, if you wanted to, get a truck from your employer or rent a truck and learn however you learn, whether it's from a friend, an uncle, truck driving school, whatever. And then you could just go take a truck and book your own test. And I don't know if this has happened anywhere else, but at least in Missouri, they're getting rid of that. You have to go through a state licensed truck driving school to get your CDL. You can't just do it yourself. You can't just learn the old way like I did. I don't know if that's a trend, if it's happening anywhere else, but if you want to do that, do it while the doing's good.
So I think Gort's spot on. There are all kinds of jobs that are good jobs. And I always, hate reaching this point in a conversation and realizing all I've done has been negative about driving, because there are, I meet, truck drivers who are very happy with their job and very happy with their pay and their benefits and everything else all the time. And there are great trucking jobs left. There's no doubt about it. And they're all over the place. And that's partly, one of the features of them is that there's, the industry is super diverse. Like, it's as diverse as the goods that people have to move. So you could be moving, propane, right? Or, really nice cars or, whatever it is that people care about, for one reason or another. And they're willing to pay a driver who has skills beyond, simply keeping it between the lines, right? On the highway long distances. And those jobs are going to remain. There's no doubt about that. And so in that report that I mentioned at driverlessreport.org, I do, kind of a rough calculation of how many jobs I think are potentially at risk. Somewhere around 300,000 out of 1.8 million or so. And those are the ones that are the simplest. So the jobs, I think the best way to think about which jobs are at risk are the high turnover jobs where you can train somebody to do the job in a couple of weeks. Those are the jobs that are at risk. Why are they at risk? Because the driver has very few skills other than just driving it and keeping it between the lines. So when that's what the job is, you bump into a dock that's set up, for big trucks, and somebody loads the truck with a forklift, and then you just have to get it safely to the interstate and keep it between the lines. Like, those are the jobs that have been simplified already to the point where they're easier to automate. But that's not most truck driving jobs. The vast majority of drivers do far more than just drive. But this gets to the point, I think, where we're going to be at a potentially painful transition for employers, where those companies that have engaged in this, race to the bottom and are now doing this high turnover model where their average worker has 3 or 6 months experience, they're going to automate. But the problem is they're the primary entry point for people into the industry today. So that pipeline, now the better employers used to just wait, for the last 20 years or so, they've waited for people to emerge from that pipeline, whoever the survivors, with a clean driving record, and they skim the cream off the top. but that market's so bad now, there's not enough cream to skim off. And so we have been needing to go that apprenticeship model to just change the way that people get into the industry. And the problem is these big companies have so much incentive to invest in that high turnover model, to develop these recruitment training programs. So when you go online, here's the first advice I give: don't go to Google and search for free truck driver training, right? Now programs are coming online. I just heard like Cisco is developing, the food delivery company. Now that's a tough job, right? Because it's physical. You're going to be dealing with customers. You're going to be handling a lot of stuff, but it has good pay, good benefits, right?
And you have to start at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
All those food service guys start at like midnight, 2 a.m.
Yep.
It's antisocial hours, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people like it, because then they're free during the day or earlier in the day, and they coach their kids' baseball team or whatever, so they're all different kinds of jobs. Right. But the problem that we have is that the good employers don't have training programs right now. So there's no way for you to get into that kind of apprenticeship model and get that training without going through the big truckload firms. Now, hopefully that's going to change. The Department of Labor has been pushing for registered apprenticeships. So, President Biden wants 2 million of them, which would be a lot. But the idea is, you train people for good jobs rather than, and there's a commitment from those employers. So Walmart, which is, people are surprised to learn, pretty good trucking employer. They're starting their own trucking schools. They've got 2 or 3 that they're considering right now. Some of the LTL carriers do their own training. They're, some of the big ones and some smaller ones. Some of the food company, again, food movers are doing it. Gold Star Foods, Cisco. So I do think we've seen enough pressure on the system now that the good employers are saying, you know what, forget the way we've been doing it and waiting to find drivers from that somebody else trained. We're gonna bring people in ourselves, or train their own. Like one of the big ones that I've talked to about this is the U.S. Postal Service. So U.S. Postal Service has tons of drivers, right? Letter carriers and others who may be interested in becoming truck drivers, but they don't have a program internally to train them to drive big trucks, right? Which just doesn't make any sense, right? You said you're going out to the market. So I think we're going to see more and more pressure on that. But those are the opportunities I would recommend somebody looks for. Try to find a training program associated with a good job.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I guess kind of by way of conclusion on this conversation, and you talk a little bit about it in the book, like what Steve and Gord, you certainly have talked to me about it. What is there that is intrinsically or that you really liked about a good day of driving, Gord? Is there ever a day that you like to drive on the road?
Well, I mean, I like every day for the most part. I mean, I drive for a living. There's a reason I like it. Oh, man. I've had some transcendental experiences, so to speak, when I've been in sort of remote areas and nobody around and just being by myself behind the wheel. I think people of a certain who enjoy a certain solitude and being by themselves are going to enjoy that regardless of what they're hauling, where they're going. Like I say, it's for a lot of guys, it's an identity. It's not just a job; it's a lifestyle, and that sort of ties into it,
Now, Steve, when you were behind the wheel, you surely had days. You said, where everything went right, and you got everything in, and it wasn't that bad. Did you have days where you liked the flow of driving?
Oh, absolutely. Huh. I don't know. I mean, there might be some people who like the time away from home. I never liked that part. But yeah, it's a very satisfying, kind of job because it's tangible and there's not a lot of bullshit in office politics, and you are in control a lot. But my favorite part, without a doubt, and I'm really lucky because I get to continue this because my research takes me into places to survey drivers, is for me, I love the kind of behind the scenes tour of the economy that you get, so especially that's one of the advantages in truckload is you go to all kinds of places. So, you go to the place where where they store all the Bud Light, so I delivered Bud Light, down to Atlanta and out to Wisconsin and all it's like, wow, this giant cavern of Bud Light. And then you go next, you might be picking up, the place where they make the boxes for Huggy diapers, Huggies. So you just see all these places. Like right now, I'm working on a study for the state of California on agricultural drivers. And so we're tracing 7 products from the fields to grocery stores in New York State. So Halo, the little Halo citrus and
yeah, I like those.
All kinds of stuff, lettuce and strawberries, and it's just amazing to see the cooling facility where they have to bring like Driscoll's strawberries down from the field to 34 degrees within 2 hours. And so these 12 pallet forklifts that kind of take the stuff off the field trucks, get it in, pack it. And then on the other side of the building, there's a team of reefer drivers who are ready to haul ass to New York, and that's just cool. It's huge industrial agriculture, whatever, but you can't help but just stand in awe at the system that moves all this stuff. And for me, that is always interesting. Every one of those facilities to me is just a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in the book, Steve, I might be wrong, in The Big Rig, that, and I found it amazing that within this system with all of its inefficiency and complications, freight is rarely lost under our current system.
Yeah. Yeah, we move an ungodly amount of stuff. It's just, you look at these import surges right now, we're up 20% from 2019. People are like, oh my God, we've got 100,000 containers. Most of those are containers, by the way, that there's stuff that people don't want. That's why they're sitting there, because they're garden hose attachments that never got into the store. They're school supplies that nobody can sell right now, Halloween costumes, Thanksgiving decorations that aren't going to make it, so that's the stuff that's clogging everything up, is just sitting there. Meanwhile, we've moved, 20% more imports than we did, before the pandemic. That's incredible. And a lot of truck drivers really kicked ass during the start of the pandemic, moving stuff,
Yeah. Well, the most essential of essential workers. Yeah. I didn't slow down for shit.
Yeah. It was pretty impressive.
The propane must flow. That's true.
Gotta have propane.
Well, I wanted to thank both of you guys for being here, just to give a comprehensive look at all this. I think a couple months down the line, as things, I know Gord will try to be back with somebody or something for logistics and tackle that. But Steve, maybe in a year or so, or as this develops, we'll come back and we can kind of connect the dots on things that change. Maybe there'll be some positive developments to go over or something like that. I really want people to take this episode and have a full explainer, along with a link to the earlier episode where Gord talks about his whole career. The full explainer of what's going on in the trucking industry, because it really is the arteries and veins of the country's existence. It's pretty fascinating. Like you said, the idea that these massive mounds of stuff are moved from here to there is pretty remarkable, and that these essential goods move around. In spite of the problems and all of that, it's a very interesting system. It's one of the most interesting things that you could possibly think about. So I've enjoyed learning about it from your book, from this talk, from Gord's talk, and I hope other folks listen to this and enjoy it. So thank both of you for being here.
Thanks, Oliver. I appreciate the opportunity, and I think we're going to have a lot to talk about in a year from now.
Hopefully it's positive. All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Oliver, and thank you, Professor Viscelli. It's not often you get the studied and the professor together on the same show. Yeah. There's been a lot of podcasts as of late and media pieces all, going over the supply chains, and to actually have, the two of us together on one show.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good stuff. Thank you very much.
I really am glad that you guys can both be on. I know we talked about it a while back, but I'm glad you guys can both be on. I'm glad we got ours done, Gord, sort of in advance of a lot of the conversations about this, so that you could share it with people that were posting. And Gord, if you don't know, always tries to set the record straight as the stories are coming out. He tries to provide that voice, but I think with shows like this, where we can bring Steve, who's also a trucker and an academic, bring Gord in and have all of this recorded. I think that's just incredible. I mean, it's capturing the different voices, and it's also a chance to sort of hear different perspectives. So thanks for being on, guys.
Thank you.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in, keep trucking like the Doodah Man, together, more or less in line, just keep trucking on.